I just want to say thank you to everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eugene Turk. I am the Vice President of Business Development at Align, and I want to welcome you to our monthly coach webinar for May 2022. As I said, I hope everyone is doing well, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have Coach Charlie Janes with a presentation on how to build an aligned and accountable team. For those of you who may not be familiar with Charlie, he is the CEO of Agile Customer Engagement and is a certified focal point business growth coach. Prior to becoming a coach, Charlie helped scale 3 organizations from the ground up to the 100+ million revenue plateau, and he sold one of those businesses for over $300 million. Over the last 10 years, he has helped 7 different startups define a unique market niche, develop an initial product, and acquire their first 10 to 50 customers to really get those companies off the ground. His mission is to strengthen communities through meaningful job creation and business growth. In addition to being a business coach, Charlie is an operator as well, as he still owns a fast-growing adult home care business that he and his wife scaled from 1 employee to over 120 employees in just 14 months. That's exponential growth. So we are honored to have Charlie present to us and for us this morning. As always, one administrative matter, we want this to be as educational and informational for all of you as possible. Please feel free to pose questions using the chat feature, and we will direct those to Charlie during his presentation, or we will hold them until the conclusion of the presentation, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions, if not all, as we have time for. Again, thank you everybody for attending this Align Coach webinar, and I will now turn the microphone over to Charlie. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you, Eugene. I'm absolutely delighted to be participating today. So thank you to Align today and the entire wonderful team there. You guys are great business partners. So as Eugene said, I'm a certified focal point business and executive coach. And essentially in that role, I help business leaders imagine and achieve better business outcomes. The types of things that my clients want to accomplish really relate to some combination of 3 things. They want to accelerate their revenue and their profit growth by double or triple digits. And especially now with digitization and COVID, some businesses are growing rapidly while others are slipping away. The second thing that they want is they want to build stronger teams and systems to scale the business over time. And particularly in ways where they're spending more time working on what we call on the business, doing strategy and things rather than down in the business doing all the work. And the third thing that they want is they want to plan for the right exit at the right time to leave the right legacy for themselves and their families, but also their employees and their communities and their customers. So a big challenge that all these clients have right now is this idea of our workforce. Nobody can hire enough people, and the people that you're looking for aren't necessarily bringing the right skills. And sometimes there's a lack of alignment. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is finding ways to gain better alignment. And by alignment, I mean connecting your strategy, the things that we'll talk about how to do that today, but your goals and the way you're going to achieve those goals with your customers and their needs, with your employees, and with your internal processes. And when you gain alignment, you start gliding through the water rather than going in fits and starts. So I think Eugene did a great job of providing my background. And the only reason why we spend that time is just to let you know that I'm just not another crazy uncle talking about ideas. I've actually been in your shoes. What it means to grow a business from 0 to 100 million and beyond is that you start as an individual contributor and you're part of a founding team collaborating and getting a business launched. And then you hire your first manager. And then eventually you hire your first manager of managers, and then a manager of those managers, and so forth. And during the phase of business growth cycles, which businesses go through a life cycle of learning about their customers and their ideal to profit, they eventually hopefully get into a growth cycle. And then all businesses, or at least products, eventually enter a decline cycle unless they reimagine themselves. So that's certainly the journey I've been with. The recommendations that we'll make today will be around that. But I'm aligned with Focal Point. So those of you that don't know Focal Point, we've been around for over 20 years, founded by a guy named Brian Tracy. So what it basically means is that we have processes and recommendations that are in use by over 10,000 businesses, and over 100,000 executives use our training classes and our coaching programs. So we really act as coaches, more as guides to help you translate your strategies into the path that you want to go down. So let's get into it. There's 3 learning objectives today. We're going to talk a little bit about statistics. We're going to give you a little bit of background in terms of where we are as a society in terms of engaging with our employees and having productive teams. And then I'm going to talk about 3 ideas for building good, healthy cultures. And then from there, we'll go with 5 recommendations on things that all of you can do to strengthen and align your teams. So here's the bad news, and I don't think that this will surprise you, but Gallup is one of the leading HR firms that does a lot of surveys. And right now, their studies are showing that 85% of employees globally either report themselves as being highly disaffected or somewhat disaffected. That basically means that those people aren't really connected to the health of the business as much as they're distracted by the health of themselves and their family, which isn't completely unreasonable. But unfortunately, it also means that they sometimes aren't even committed to the outcomes that customers get, which can be fatal for a business. So these statistics are partially what's driving what we hear called the Great Resignation. Many of you have heard the statistics, I'm not going to share here, about the number of people who are either ready to quit their jobs or already who have quit their jobs, which is creating an enormous impact on our ability to see businesses serve their clients. You see it all the time when you go out to a restaurant and the restaurant's not open when it normally is, or when you have to wait for a table an unusually large amount of time. There just aren't enough servers. Well, the same is true with factories, and the same is true in technical businesses as well. So it's a very, very big issue. Now, so there's really, based on this, what we've noticed is that according to SHRM, an HR association, items like maintaining employee morale, which last year was only ranked 19th in terms of importance of management attention for the effectiveness of business, is now number 1. Retaining top talent is number 2. And of course, finding and recruiting the right people when there's a scarcity of those people is number 3. And I think the main message here is that this comes down to, I think, alignment. It's not just money. So the premise for today's webinar is that with alignment, getting people bought in to being part of something bigger, bought into a team experience, is probably the most important thing that you can do to retain the best employees, but more importantly, to generate better business results. And let's talk about those business results. So according to studies by the Queen's School of Business and Gallup organization, which I've quoted before, the impact of disengaged workers are that you have 37% higher absenteeism, 49% more accidents, and 60% more errors. So the outcome, the business impact of your organization is 18% lower productivity, 16% lower profitability as you clean up all the messes caused by that, 37% less job growth, 65% lower share price, and 100% fewer job applications. So it kind of feeds on itself, that the more that you're struggling with disengaged workers, it makes it harder for your business to attract engaged workers into your business. But now let's take a look at the other side of it. If you're willing to focus time and energy on solving these problems, as we said before, many companies, these are their top priorities this year. So if they're not your top priorities, I'm going to encourage you to think about them as a business owner or as a business leader. But engaged employees, 50% post messages and pictures and videos about their business. They're proud to work there. And 33% have in the past shared unsolicited praise about their business, genuine praise. And 24% are likely to help boost sales when sales isn't their title, but yet they make it part of their business to help the business find new clients. I call this lightning in a bottle. So if you're struggling to hire people, one of my recommendations is make employee recommendations or references a major part of your program. Ask your best employees who they know, and they'll help you attract people who you'll have more predictable performance from, and you'll create a more cohesive team of people as well. Now let's kind of pivot to how we ended up here. And I don't think any of this is going to be earth-shattering, so I'm going to go a little more quickly for this part. First off, remote and hybrid work have made it much harder for us as managers to integrate in, especially new employees, but all employees, and getting good teamwork there. There's changing work preferences that you're reading about every day, where more and more people who have been able to work from home want to stay at home. And there's a lot of good news with that. A lot of their personal productivity have gone way up. But some of the downsides are that culture gets degraded. I have somebody close to me in my life who took a job in an advertising agency, and the manager, using Zoom, just simply wanted all the employees to turn on their cameras. And this person felt that that was becoming an intrusion. Now, the manager is obviously just trying to build collaboration and teamwork, but the employee's perspective has changed about what's expected of them, and didn't want that intrusion into their home. So it really kind of shows you the things that managers are up against. And again, I'm not really expecting that any of this is going to surprise you, but I do want to make a point. You can learn from others who have been managing people remotely. So most of us that come from the tech world, or anybody who's ever managed a field organization or a delivery organization or a support organization, typically has people all over the world. So there's a lot of best practices that you can learn from with software automation and management best practices right from the get-go. Matter of fact, I'll give you a quick tip right now. One of my favorite managers used to just have us every morning in a WhatsApp application, simply typing in the 3 things for the people on our distribution list: the salespeople, the sales engineers, the management team, the 3 things we were going to work on for the day, and the 3 things maybe we accomplished the previous day. There was no overhead, but it was a way to create camaraderie about what we were working on and coordinate very, very quickly. So there's all kinds of hacks like that available when you talk with people who are already doing this. There's also companies that have been purpose built, like HubSpot. Many of you might be familiar with HubSpot as a customer relationship management software. Well, HubSpot has over 3,000 employees, and the company, again, was built from the ground up with processes and automation around the fact that nobody works in a central office. So there are answers for these things that you can go to. Now, demographically, things have really changed a lot. I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about the baby boomers retiring. COVID made a huge impact on that. And a lot of us don't know how many of the baby boomers are going to be coming back. They're actually starting to show signs that they're not done working yet. But for the purposes of this presentation, I don't know what's going to happen. But having a strategy to incorporate baby boomers into your business and having a diverse workforce is a really good thing to do. But the other thing that we're seeing is that the Generation Z, the Generation X, the millennials, we malign them sometimes, especially those of us that are older. And I'm reminded, though, that when I came into the workforce, people older than me also had opinions about my generation or my group as well. So I think that this has been going on through time. There's a lot of things that the millennials and the younger generations bring to our businesses, and they understand your business's customers because, you know, many of the people buying from your business are that generation. But nonetheless, they're proving that they want different things. As a matter of fact, surveys say that it's not about the money, for instance. It's about the mission and the purpose of the business. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Now, another problem that businesses face, sometimes they don't know that they have it, is that they don't even understand their own culture. And worse, sometimes they kid themselves about the culture they have, and they have one for investors or customers that's very consumable, and one that the new employees find out when they show up. And that is a surefire way to have very short retention rates of your employees. So you really want to avoid that. So what do you do about this? Well, I'm sorry, I skipped one really important thing here. So surveys from Glassdoor. Glassdoor is an application where employees can post their resumes when they're looking for jobs, but more importantly, it's a place where employees go to rate their employers. And one of the studies that Glassdoor did, it says that 77% of candidates in 2021 check websites about things like the values to see if there's an alignment. So they're grading their employers now. So it's really important that you do have your values well represented and they're consistent with the way your people really behave. And finally, 79% of employees now are looking into the real mission before they apply to businesses. So now let's talk about 3 things that you can do to make your culture a strength itself. A lot of companies don't actively measure how satisfied their employees are. But before I mentioned Glassdoor, and one of the worst things that you can do is wait to get posts from disgruntled employees that are either unhappy in your organization or who have already left your business, who are giving you bad ratings. And on the other hand, I've actually worked for companies where the management team actually badgered the employees into giving them good ratings so that they would attract other people. Well, you're probably wondering, how effective is that? If you're trying to attract people and you're saying that your culture is Y, but it's really X, you're going to have a lot of turnover. And turnover is really expensive. Studies show that the cost to replace an employee that resigns on you is anywhere from 50%. Some studies show 300% of the actual cost of the employee, depending on the amount of training that you invest and the amount of capital equipment, things that are assigned to those people. It's a very significant thing to lose an employee. So getting it right the first time is important. So the first recommendation is surveys. And Glassdoor can be an after the fact survey, and it's also a very public survey. I encourage my clients to use something called an employee net promoter score. For those of you that aren't familiar with net promoter score, it's the ultimate question. It asks customers, or in this case, when you put the E in front of it, it asks your employees, it asks the ultimate question. How likely are you to recommend our business to someone that's close to you? And if they give you an 8 or a 10, that means they're a promoter. They're actively promoting you. And I'm sorry, a 9 or a 10. If they give you a 7 or an 8, they're neutral. And anything below that, they're negative. So you basically measure the positive, you subtract the negatives from positives, and you have an actual score. And each industry has their own ratings for employees and customers. So one of the first things I do when I go to work for a company is I ask them to start measuring their employees' Net Promoter Score so that they can get an internal read on what's going on. And once you start getting feedback from your clients, even when they're happy, I always ask, what one thing could we do better? And then I always ask, for the positive feedback and the things that need to be improved. But that's a good way to keep it out of Glassdoor and internally while you can still do something about it. The second idea, of course, and this is certainly something that's central to everything Align today stands about, is this idea of communicating values. And I should say focal point and many of the other coaching methodologies like scaling up and EOS, is when you start with values, values are the principles that enable employees to make decisions when you're not there to tell them what to do. And let's face it, the pace of change has never been faster. So employees need to understand what you stand for, and it needs to really, really matter. So I typically go through clients and do an exercise where, one, we evaluate how relevant the values are and how much they're being practiced. And we look for case studies with customers who are not as satisfied as they could be to see if a value hasn't been followed or if they have the wrong values. But typically what you want to do is you do, as a company, want to establish values and then they're forever. But nonetheless, clinging to a value that's not working for you isn't a good strategy either. And then finally, the other thing that you can do is use assessments. And the idea with the assessments are to understand the individuals that are coming into the organization. I actually recommend them a lot of times for key candidates, but certainly for all your employees. So when I start an engagement with a client, I usually do the executive leadership team. Now, there's a range of information that you can get from assessments, and there's all kinds of different brands. I use TTI because they offer most of the assessments on the circle. And the assessments highlighted here in red are from the outside in, things like behavior, acumen, how good they are at a task, like sales skills as an example. Professional competencies. This is similar to something like a Strength Finders, but TTI has their own survey called DNA. You look at their experience, which generally comes from their resume or from their LinkedIn profile, as well as their education and their training. You want to look deeply into their motivations. As a matter of fact, when I personally have led large teams of salespeople, 100 or more, really the only type of interview I ever gave them was I wanted to understand their motivations, why they joined the last job they were at, why they left, what they loved about it, what they didn't, what they loved about their manager and what they didn't. Because really, you can do that early in a process to find out if there's a very, very good fit. Well, TTI also has a really good assessment that digs a little deeper than that, that measures people on six different categories. And that will help you match the right people to the right job. And then so on and so forth. That comes all the way down to emotional intelligence, which is a really important skill set, especially for your leaders when you're trying to drive a lot of change in your organization. Now, a little bit more on these things in terms of the ways you can do this when you're building a culture. As once you understand someone's behavior and their motivations, that's going to drive the way they communicate. And remember when I talked about before the fact that businesses have life cycles? Sometimes you build a management team around a business that's learning, like a startup. And those are one set of people. They're people that don't follow a lot of rules. They're very creative. They move really fast. They fail fast. But as a business then goes into growth mode, more structure is needed. So when you do these assessments, you can create team profiles to understand which combination of people are really fast moving. You might say that they're shoot first, aim second, and the people that move a little slower. Let me explain how you might use that. When you're packaging up, for instance, a sales organization, initially when it's an early stage company, you're just trying to sell a concept. So you're selling broad concepts, and the product kind of follows behind it. And then over time, once you have a good concentration of clients that have the common needs, you validated what we call a minimally viable product, then you go into a more structured sales process. Well, it turns out a lot of times sales organizations then evolve their initial salespeople and their sales leaders from people who are really good at being wildly creative to people who are really great at systematizing things. A lot of times, a sales organization, the second hire or the third hire will be a head of sales operations. Now, in this circle that's in front of you, this is actually explaining different personality types. So if you were looking left to right, the people who are called coordinators, they move a little slower, they analyze a lot more. The people on the right in the red and the yellow are what we call persuaders. They move quite a bit faster. So it sounds like, salespeople are really good on that right side, but the sales operations people, the ones that are good at seeing all the effective habits and best practices of the people who have moved really, really fast on the right-hand side, those people in sales operations codify those best practices into repeatable practices. So that's an example of how you hire the right people for the right job, but you also design an organization to be effective for the life cycle that your business is in. In this example, moving from a learning organization to a growth organization where you're systematizing things. Well, that's quite a bit. So one other thing is that you can do is these reports do things like you can build communication handbooks. So these assessments will give you an assessment of each individual or groups of people. So in this case, from a communication workshop that I do, it shows that 21% of the staff are those people who are the coordinators, the people in the greens. 5 out of 16 of the team. And it shows that those people, in terms of people and task orientation, tend to be in the middle, but they're definitely slower paced. And it shows what types of words work for them. So a key to communication is that the communicator, the person who's looking to accomplish something, needs to tailor their language to a way that it can be heard by the person who needs to actually do the work. It's kind of the opposite. A lot of times bosses think that the employee needs to just automatically glean the information the way they're speaking, but that's actually not really effective. So reports like this help a manager understand from their staff which people need to be communicated with words like proven, standard, organized, and others that want ideas like fun, fast, and so forth. So now that we understand what kind of a culture we have, or the culture that we want, what do we do with it? And that's where these 5 recommendations are going to come into play. So my first recommendation is invest in your low and your middle level employees. Have growth conversations with them. You want to sit down with them early, and whereas the first meeting needs to communicate the organizational goals. It's really important that everybody understands what success is for the organization and success for your clients as well. But ultimately, every manager, every management team needs to understand what success is for the individual if you want to retain those people. And then ultimately, you want to have some realistic assessment of strengths and weaknesses. And that's all part of career planning. What motivates them? What qualifications do they have? And I always recommend assigning a mentor to that person, somebody who's not the manager, that they can ask questions, they can do trial balloon. If they're making mistakes, a safe place to go where they can figure out ways of correcting those mistakes or preventing mistakes. The second recommendation is skills and career talent training. That seems obvious, but studies are showing, especially with the millennials, that that's the number one thing they want right now. They'll literally take jobs at slightly less pay to work for organizations that will actually train them. So I'm showing examples here of things like goal setting, selling skills for people, sales management skills, time management. There's a host of training classes that you can give from reputable training companies, as well as tons of online training. So there's no excuse not to be giving your people the right training. But I really focus back on the basics. My recommendation is focus on the basics of communication, especially for our newest generations who tend to do things like lean towards constant texting. Turns out that only 7% of communication is words. So if you're relying on texting continuously, that shows you the potential of 93% of the time you could be missing the target with communications. So that's where you can get the greatest possible lift from your newer employees, is just helping them. The third recommendation that I have for you is create a coaching culture. I'm showing an example here of a course that we take as professional coaches that is available to businesses as well, both in an open enrollment or in a team format. But I'm not necessarily here to promote this individual class. The message that I'd like you to take away is create a coaching culture. Now, for those of you that don't know what a coaching culture is, it gets back to the idea of getting out of the business if you're a leader and getting to the strategy part. But how do you get accountability with employees if you're always telling them what to do, if you're analyzing the problem for the employee? So this little diagram here on this slide is this idea that you get the employee to summarize where an initiative is in your environment and where you want to be. And you come up with a shared understanding. That's what we call the gap. And then the third step is then saying, okay, in this gap, what's my plan? And you ask the employee to go away and come up with 3 ideas about ways to fill in that gap. And then you ask them, as part of a coaching methodology, well, what could go wrong? That's the 4th step. Think through all the things that could go wrong. And that learning experience right there is great for your employees. And that is certainly a time where you as a manager can also save them a lot of grief. And then finally, always, 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 whether you're dealing with a highly experienced employee that you're giving a lot of leeway and they're just going off and doing the project and reporting back, you still want to ask them what they learned, what the results of the project is. Why? Well, it's like that example I gave you of the sales operations team that's always systematizing best practices. You always want to learn from your best people about new ways of doing things so that you can update the other staff and teach them new ways of doing things, but also create new automations that will automate things altogether. You know, the greatest waste of time is doing a task well that doesn't need to be done at all. So you can learn a lot from your staff about ways of eliminating steps to become more competitive and more effective. So always debrief is a 5th step. And my final recommendation then, or actually my 4th recommendation, is to create a 1-page strategic plan. Now, those of you that have attended other webinars might know Vern Harnish and the methodology Scaling Up. That's one of my favorite coaching books. So what I do with most of my clients is early in the engagement is I try to get them to write a 1-page strategic plan. And what you're seeing here is on the left-hand side is we have the client describing what the strategic target is. And on the far left side, writing down the values. making sure that the values are always visible to the employee. Now, obviously, we want the values to be visible all over the organization, always represented. And we'll get to more about ways that you can do that. But putting it into the strategic plan is important, along with the mission or the purpose, which is the why you do what you do. So on this one-page plan, what I love about this is one place where then you can set your targets. Your target, the third column over from the right, is your 3 to 5 year plan. If you really rethink and you do everything right and you systematize, you make your organization more effective, you build a better team, where can you be 3 to 5 years out? Those are the types of things that you want to put in your target, and you want to set a specific date. So typically in this case, I've got 3 years out, December 31st, 2024. And, for this client, they want to achieve 25 million in revenues. They want to achieve a set amount of profit, and you make it specific, SMART goals, specific, measurable, aligned with values, risky, but realistic, and always, always, always time bound. And then we boil that down to a 1 year goal in the middle, a quarterly goal moving forward, a theme for the quarter, which is typically around getting the values, applying the values to accomplishing those goals. And then as you move down through the spreadsheet, that's where we start delegating from the top management team to the next level down, all the actions and key thrusts and key initiatives and rocks and accountabilities. But I start with paper to keep things really, really simple. And then my final recommendation is to automate. And indeed, I do use something called focal point focus, which is from Align today. Focal point coaches and coaches from other leading brands use products like Align today to get all of that information off the paper and alive, so that it's continuously being seen every day and integrated in with communication mechanisms, daily huddles, weekly meetings, monthly meetings, quarterly updates, quarterly planning, and so forth. So I absolutely love implementing things in a way that cascade down from the organizational's top level goal. In this slide, it shows dials that are driving the top level management team. And then what they do is they assign to their direct report anywhere between 3 and 5 measures, the way that employee will chunk down their activities in ways that will enable the larger organization to directly achieve their goals. Now, you remember we talked about the psychology of human beings, the way people like to be part of things. This is where I want to tie it back together. I think the reason why so many people are dissatisfied and so disaffected is they usually don't understand day to day, when they're dealing with all the great challenges, the great exertions, the stress that comes from doing a worthy task, but struggling and coming up short, sometimes over and over again. It's not tied to how the organization's doing. That gets lonely and people quit. But when it's tied to an organizational success, and when you can raise your hand and ask for help when you're blocked, that's what creates a high performance team. So that's the basic idea with automating, where these things, these goals, these initiatives, day-to-day status becomes available on the employee's desktop, for a working employee, on a phone, and so forth. So I really like the idea of automation if your business is growing fast. So I've thrown a lot at you in a short amount of time. I would be thrilled to have one-on-ones with any one of you if you would just like to talk about your business and maybe just share ideas. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I share best practices there all the time. And I always, always share tidbits from my focal point library and things I learned from other great coaches like Vern Harnish and The list is endless. Michael Hyatt on time management. So anytime you want to share things like that, I'll gladly send you materials. And if you'd like to do a free business review, I'm happy to do the walk through a 60 to 90-minute session where I'll send you a short questionnaire. It's actually an automated system that I have. And we'll talk about your business and your goals, where the gap is, where you're at, where you want to be, where you see potential disconnects. And we'll talk through ways of narrowing that gap and working through, particularly as it relates to building a better, more aligned and accountable team. Well, Eugene, that's all I have. So I'm going to turn it over to you for questions. But thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Charlie. A wonderful, wonderful presentation with lots of powerful information that hopefully everyone can sort of digest. Again, for those of you who do have questions, please feel free to post those in the chat. I certainly have a question, Charlie, and that really has to do with, in terms of you're a new business, you want to create a culture, but how do you sort of go about doing so versus sort of having a culture organically create itself within the organization rather than the founders or the CEO of a business sort of imposing their culture upon the organization. So sort of, there's two different schools of thought, because a lot of times founders will say, this is my organization, this is the culture I want it to have, rather than sort of the employees from a bottom down creating a culture that is really the culture of all of the employees that are actually working there. Just welcome your thoughts on that.
Wow, that is such a great question. And I've worked in multiple organizations. There's a great podcast. Reid Hoffman was the founder of LinkedIn. And he has a podcast on scaling businesses. And I listened to a podcast the other day about creating a hiring culture. And it gets back to how a lot of startups happen when a founder only has a vague idea about what the product will be. And sometimes one of the first things they do is they start surrounding themselves with a couple key people that they've worked with before that believe the same things that they believe. So Reid, in his case, believes that building a truly great company that's going to scale fast, and that's the key. Lots of businesses start and stay in a tiny incubator mode, losing business, remaking themselves over and over and over again. Reid argues that the first couple of people you hire are doing nothing but thinking about the next 5 people you're going to hire, the people who can flesh out the product idea, the messaging idea, the culture ideas, and that you purposely build those values from the ground up on day one. Now, on the other hand, I do personally value, I've been on that end of it where I was recruited in by a Fortune 500 company to create a software module where on day one, when we showed up, they handed us the values of this company, which was the world's 3rd largest furniture company, which was completely, those values were completely off base in terms of making decisions quickly, taking risk, failing fast. A $2 billion furniture company doesn't want to fail fast at all. But a startup company with a limited budget does. So I see the argument in both, and I think there's some give and take.
Yeah, and the reason that I asked the question is we have heard, obviously we have worked with a lot of companies that do strategic planning sessions, and as part of those planning sessions, one of the exercises is to develop your core values. And so you bring in lots of voices, lots of different leadership and middle managers to sort of participate in that exercise of creating your core values. And there is group think that comes up with those core values, and yet then the CEO or the founder of the organization goes, well, yeah, but that's not a core value of mine, and I started this company. And so, there can sometimes be sort of dichotomies of values between the founder and what he really what he or she envisioned were going to be the values of this business, and the values that are actually created by all of the employees when you bring in outside voices to sort of do that exercise.
Well, there's an absolute truth that some businesses are conceptualized to be a certain type of business. and then become a completely different business based on market demand, a couple key employees. So certainly I can see the need for a founder to be a little bit flexible if the values fall out of line. But one interesting point of thought, and I get this from Brian Tracy, and I get this from a lot of the other huge coaches, is that vision is the thing that can't be outsourced. At the end of the day, there's the vision. Term of EOS, we might call it, the visionary, and then there's the integrator. So, the vision really has to come from the person who's got the name on the door, or the burning fire to create the company. And as a result, the values often spill out of that initial bucket.
Charlie, we've had a question raised to us. The question is, do you think daily huddles work? If yes, what do you focus on in those daily huddles? I'll let you answer, and I have a few thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so I do. Most people that hire me are hiring me because they're really struggling with time effectiveness or time mastery. And they're having way too many meetings. There's too many pieces missing, and they're always misaligned and out of sync. So some of the steps that I normally do is I try to get the executive team on an ideal week calendar, an idea from Michael Hyatt and company, and probably others as well. And in that idea, that's where I really like huddles, having a predictable time where a constituency, either a department or the leadership team, spends 15 minutes, and I'm pretty strict, no more than 15 minutes, talking about the key things accomplished to create a sense of momentum, to articulate the 3 things they're going to work on in an area where they need help, but in a predictable time, so that you're not emailing that stuff back and forth, and you're not having too many side meetings. So yeah, I'm a big fan of huddles, particularly in fast-moving industries like tech. But I'm implementing them right now at a cleaning industry, a construction company, and an accounting firm.
Yeah, and the thing that I would add is daily huddles are invaluable to the communication within an organization. I'm happy to just sort of share, for example, my own experience. So at Align, I am currently a member of 2 daily huddles every single day. So I am part of the sales team daily huddle. We meet at exactly 11:30 every single morning. And that huddle, like Charlie said, never takes more than 15 minutes, regardless of the number of people that we have in that meeting. And right now it's probably about 10 or 12 people in that huddle every single morning. And it is just a communication purposed huddle. There is no problem solving during the meeting. Each and every person speaks, and each and every person identifies essentially, what am I working on today? What was I able to achieve or complete yesterday? And what am I stuck on that I might need some help with from the rest of the team? Or is there some good news that I want to share so that we can all sort of celebrate that work getting done? That's it. Now, I might hear something during that huddle where I will then follow up after the huddle with an individual employee or member of that huddle and say, hey, I heard you're struggling with this. Here's how we handled that with another customer. So you can hear about the problems that people are having and then start to collaborate and work together well.
Yeah. I'd love to talk to the person. Well, if there's more feedback from the person that asked the question about whether they've had bad experience with huddles, that would be interesting. One thing I've experienced is the squirrel syndrome, where someone will just go off on a tangent, and then the whole room will just go running up and down the tree like mad squirrels having a blast. That's why I'm so adamant about either having a paper plan or an automated plan. So typically when I implement automation in the huddle, on the huddle page, that's why the person's goals are always there, to always keep everybody focused on what the goal is and not the tangential issues.
Scott, I think you were asking me sort of what are the topics that are discussed during a daily huddle. It's typically, what am I working on today? What was I able to achieve or accomplish yesterday? And am I stuck on anything or that I need help with Or is there some good news that I want to share with the rest of the team so that we can all reward and celebrate those accomplishments? To your point, Charlie, that's part of the sort of the best practices that we share with all of our customers who use the Align sort of family of software tools is you ask your employees to literally spend no more than 5 minutes doing some pre-thought before the huddle and go into the software, that's your automation tool, and go ahead and document, this is what I did yesterday, this is what I'm working on today, and this is the good news or the stucks that I need to discuss. Because you're absolutely right. The worst thing that happens in a huddle is when you start to get sort of off the cuff, information being sort of thrown up by various employees. They haven't done any pre-thought, so they're sort of just ribbing and trying to rack their brains about what's the most important information that I need to share. So if you just ask your employees to spend 5 minutes to do a little bit of homework or pre-thought before each huddle, that is what really keeps the huddle to less than 15 minutes, and it makes it very efficient and very productive. So I was just going to continue. So I have a sales team huddle, but we also have an all hands huddle every single day. So every single team member within the Align organization is part of that daily huddle, and every single person speaks. And it's a large group at this point. And even still, that meeting we do at 11:47 every single morning. And the purpose at that time is because we don't want to get into the lunch hour. Everybody knows that this is a very short huddle, 15 minutes or maybe 20 minutes at the most, where everyone is going to get at least 1 minute or 30 seconds to give that update. So that way I know what development is working on. I know what marketing is working on. That's not my world. I don't need to know the nitty gritty or the details, but from a very high level, I am immediately every day informed of what those teams and what those individual employees are working on to help me know what's going on in the organization. So we'll end there with huddles. There was a question, Charlie, that was posed sort of, do you have any recommendations for companies building a strong culture with remote teams? Obviously, we do ENPS to sort of gauge employee satisfaction, but in terms of really building that culture, how do we do that when we don't necessarily see each other day to day, or we have remote team employees and team members?
Yeah, the most important thing I would say is learn from companies that have already done it. There's case studies, podcasts. Anybody wants, send me their name or whatever. But like HubSpot, I've listened to some podcasts about how HubSpot did it from the ground up, using free tools like Google Docs and things like that, and lots of hacks. But also building the culture of checking in with each other, building a caring culture, making time to call somebody who's out of sight. All of those things, it takes a little extra work for sure. If you're going to do it, you're going to build a resilient culture.
Great. All right. More questions. If anybody has additional questions, please use the Q&A or the chat function. We've got about 5 minutes left. I'm sure Charlie has a wealth of information that he'd love to share if anybody has any specific questions. So please raise those now. I will ask one follow-up question, Charlie. We talked about sort of investing in low-level employees and creating a coaching culture. What do you do when you've got employees that just don't level up?
Honestly, you move them out fast.
And that's obviously a very difficult conversation, but one that needs to happen sooner rather than later.
It is. And, the interesting thing is, so study after study after study shows that about 85% of success, or success is about 85% about attitude. So it's really, really important to interview people very carefully about what they believe and their attitude and how they handle things. You can do that by going through resumes and reverse, just asking about, just keep asking why. But the other thing that I love, and it's a mechanism that I learned from the EOS methodology, is using the people analyzer. And it gets back to writing down your 3 to 5, 7 values of the company, and then asking yourself 3 questions. How badly does this person want their job, their current job? How good are they at it? and how well do they get my company? Like, do they see working at my company, the culture is a plus? And on a regular basis, you go through each person and make sure that there's an alignment culturally. And when you find someone who is misaligned on a couple key values, you don't just get rid of them. You have a conversation with them and give them examples, and you're continuously positively reinforcing examples of positive values. But when someone's just not on board, get them out, because that just creates a tremendous weight on all the people there that believe what you believe.
Great. Charlie, I don't see, here we go. We have a question on how do you sell employees on covering non-job description work when the market changes? So this is coming from someone who runs a mortgage company, and obviously interest rates have doubled. He's got loan processors that he wants to keep, but they have too much capacity. And so they need to help market rather than actually, selling the mortgage offerings. So obviously this is temporary, but how do we get those people to do things that aren't necessarily part of their everyday job descriptions?
That's obviously a really tough issue. And, it depends just how passionate the people are about working for the company and doing what the company needs. I can remember my brother working for a welding company called Lincoln Electric, famous case studies where factory workers, whenever there would be a downturn, the company had a no layoff policy. So they would send factory workers out on the road to sell welding machines to industry. And, with factory workers showing up to these industrial concerns, it just built a deeper rapport. But those people had to literally leave, if they wanted to keep their jobs, they had the opportunity to do that, but they actually went off and did some selling. But Lincoln Electric had a legendary culture where people were passionate about the health of the company and the success of their clients. So it was a great way to keep the saws sharpened. So I would look for an opportunity to align in a downward cycle, how performing those types of tasks will strengthen the employee overall and help them overall, either within your organization or just be more successful overall. But if they're tasks that they just really dread, if they're in what Michael Hyatt would call the cycle of drudgery, where they're not passionate about it and they're not good at it, then it's not going to happen. It's not going to be a good fit.
I think the other key element is that you have to communicate with those employees sort of all the information as to why it is that you're asking them to do this, to help them better understand sort of the conditions of the market, the conditions of the business, and so that they have a better understanding why they're being asked to do something that is sort of outside of their scope of employment. And hopefully you have a team of team players who are all willing to pitch in and sort of go above and beyond to do things that they wouldn't normally be asked to do. All right, we have reached the top of the hour. Scott says, I like the idea that this is a no layoff policy need. Sounds great. All right, I'm very sensitive to everyone's time. I certainly want to thank you all for attending today's coach webinar. A huge thank you to Charlie for a great presentation. You can learn more about him by visiting his LinkedIn profile or sending him an email at cjanes@focalpointcoaching.com. As always, we encourage you to use the Align software if you're using it to do a lot of these things that Charlie spoke about. You can do ENPS, you can manage your daily huddles, all within the software application. If you ever need assistance or more information, please be sure to ask your Align advisor or simply email us at support@aligntoday.com. Thank you again, everybody. We hope that you will join us for our next coach webinar. Till then, we hope you have a great day and the great rest of the week. Thanks so much, Charlie.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.